What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Kaliningrad, the little piece of Russia that is not really Russia at all. Fragment of empire pinned between Poland and Lithuania, surrounded by NATO, psychologically closer to Berlin than to Moscow. For decades, Moscow treated Kaliningrad like a trophy. Look, a European region that is ours. But today that trophy feels more like an expensive suitcase with no handle, impossible to carry, humiliating to abandon, and increasingly impossible to justify. As the war drags on, the Kaliningrad region is quietly developing something as the Kremlin fears far more than protests, sanctions, or even Western weapons. A sense of separation, a feeling of difference, a realization that maybe, just maybe, the region does not need Moscow anymore. And what is dangerous about that idea is that it's not shouted in the streets, it is whispered at kitchen tables. It is messaged in private chats, expressed in eye contact when somebody says, everything is getting worse again, and another person just nods because he understands. This is not a story of rebellion, not yet. This is a story of quiet detachment, a slow and painful understanding that loyalty to the Kremlin has brought Kaliningrad nothing but isolation, shortages, and the humiliation of being chained to a collapsing empire. And while Moscow pretends nothing is happening, the resentment is growing faster than they can cover it with patriotic posters. So today, let's examine how Kaliningrad, once proudly Russian, is beginning to look around and realize that its future may not lie with the Kremlin at all. It might look alone. Let's begin with something very simple. Identity. Because identity is everything. It determines which news you trust, which neighbors you feel that are your people, and what future you imagine for your children. Kaliningraders grew up differently from the rest of Russia, obviously. They did not stare at the endless plains and remember the victories of the Red Army. They stared across the water and saw Poland modernizing. They hopped on buses and visited Lithuania's supermarkets. They experienced European roads, European salaries, European summers. They tasted a version of normal life. A life not controlled by propaganda or by Moscow's imperial complexes and ambitions. Before the war, a weekend trip to Gdansk was cheaper than flying to Moscow, believe it or not. People studied abroad, worked abroad, partied abroad. Kaliningrad was Russia's European window, not metaphorically, but literally. And when you raise a generation on these experiences and expectations and then you try to take them away, something very predictable happens. They start asking questions. Why are we the only Russians who see how much better the world can function? Why are we punished for just geography? Why are we being punished for being raised and living here? Why we even live under the laws written by men who have never even been our place here? So thoughts like this, it's not a betrayal, it's logic. Kaliningrad's culture is closer to Warsaw than Voronezh. Its architecture is a mix of German legacy and modern European reconstruction, not Soviet concrete blocks or Khrushchevki. Even the accent is different, the values are different, the political worldview is different. And because of this difference, Moscow has always looked at Kaliningrad with suspicion. A place that might one day look in the mirror and realize it just simply does not belong. And now, that day is getting closer than ever. When Putin is so busy knee-deep in Ukrainian war and trying to control Moscow and St. Petersburg residents at the same time, he simply does not have much time left to take care of distant regions, Kaliningrad included. Here, he hopes that his propagandists will do the work. And while it might get the job done in Siberia, Dagestan, Buryatia, or, Khanty-Mansiysk, it is not the same for westernmost Kaliningrad. People there are different. And so, what happened inside that region as soon as the war started? The control tightened significantly. That is the answer. Much harder than anyone else. And what no one predicted, however, is that this tightness will become the regime's own undoing. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. When the war began, Kaliningrad was hit harder than almost any other region, not by bombs, but by isolation. Suddenly the land routes through Lithuania were blocked or restricted. Cargo shipments slowed, prices jumped, goods became harder to find, fuel shipments were delayed. Even medications disappeared from the shelves. Kaliningraders who once felt like the most modern Russians woke up to discover that they were now the most trapped. Meanwhile, Moscow did what Moscow always does the best. pretend everything was just fine. They smiled on TV, they mocked sanctions, they called the situation stable, everything is under control. But local people saw what was happening with their own eyes. Every month, life became slightly more inconvenient, slightly more expensive, and a little bit more suffocating. Flights to Russia expensive or even affordable. Driving to Europe no longer possible. Visiting relatives in Poland, just forget about it. Traveling anywhere, just bureaucratic puzzle and a financial nightmare that it's just not going to happen. Kaliningrad did not just lose convenience, it lost identity. It lost the freedom of movement that defined its culture for 20 plus years. And resentment did not have to be loud to be powerful. You don't need protest when daily life itself is a protest. When everyone in line at the grocery store mutters the same sentence, that it was better before. When neighbors shake their heads at the news and don't argue anymore because they all already know. When parents look at their children and realize that the future they imagined is now completely gone. This is how revolutions begin. Not with shouting, but with silence and unspoken agreements. People no longer need to say those things to each other because they already know everything. And the only solution they see out of this problem is the autonomy. Will it happen though? Let's talk about it in our next chapter. The Kremlin fears one word more than NATO, more than sanctions, more even than the entire Ukrainian army. And this word is the autonomy. They know what happened in Catalonia, in Scotland, in Quebec. Movements that were peaceful, democratic, organized. Movements born not from suffering, but from identity. And Kaliningrad fits this pattern perfectly. No one there wants to become part of Ukraine. No one is asking to even join Poland or European Union. And contrary to what propaganda fantasizes, nobody is begging NATO to liberate them. The quiet idea developing right now is something else entirely. What if Kaliningrad just be Kaliningrad? A regional government that answers to itself, trade partners independent from Moscow, border agreements negotiated directly with its neighbors. A future not dictated by the Kremlin's paranoia. Autonomy here is not reason, autonomy here is practicality. It is in humans' nature to desire freedom, and the more you limit that freedom, the more you want it. Just think about prisoners, I guess the perfect example. They would trade everything to be free again, at least most of them. And Kaliningrad is in a prison at this point. At the same time, Kaliningrad is also an exclave. Logistically, culturally, economically, it functions differently from every other region of Russia. Governing it as if it were another piece of mainland Russia makes about it as much sense as putting submarine captain in charge of tractor factory. Different rules apply here, and people there know it. Small local businesses talk about autonomy indirectly, saying things like, if Moscow did not interfere, we could actually trade properly again, right? Teachers talk about it carefully, saying, our students deserve to live in a region connected to the world. Even ex-police officers talk about it after a couple of drinks, if you know what I mean. The Kremlin cannot even manage Moscow, and how we're supposed to wait for them to fix us? And every time somebody says it, the room goes quiet. Not because people disagree, but because everyone knows that this is precisely what every person to their left, right, in front of them and behind is thinking. That is the silence and unspoken agreements we talked about in our previous chapter. The most dangerous political moment is not when people are angry. It's when they stop believing anything will improve. And in Kaliningrad, that moment is arriving. The Kremlin has one strategy left: forced patriotism. Posters of "We are Russia", military parades, Z-banners, and loud declarations that loyalty is mandatory. But loud nationalism in Kaliningrad only highlights the absurdity. Why should a region that has felt European for the last 30 plus years pretend to be excited about being dragged backwards in a 20th century empire fantasy? Why would they need it? Why should families whose kids studied in Gdansk or Vilnius pretend that isolation is liberation? Why should people who used to live in the modern world accept a life that looks more and more like Soviet nostalgia with worse prices? And here is the part that terrifies Moscow. People in Kaliningrad are no longer afraid to say it. Russia is holding us back. Once that sentence is spoken, not in protest but in casual conversation, the psychological separation is already done. The flag is still there, the anthem still plays, it's still lyrics and everything. The map even still says Russian Federation, but in the mind, in the heart of those people, the border has already moved. That is the most dangerous kind of person to Putin. Just a regular man or woman who is unchecked and can think independently. Pretty much a profile of a regular citizen of any developed country in the world, right? Well, there is nothing regular being Russian in Putin's world. Kaliningrad is not rebelling, not rioting, not making declarations, at least not yet, and it doesn't need to be honest. The most important revolutions are internal, and that revolution has begun. The region is realizing that its identity, its culture, its daily life, its sense of belonging all point to west, not east. The Kremlin can tighten control, they can censor, arrest a few activists, even send more soldiers, hold parades or change governors, but they cannot force a population to believe something that no longer feels true. Kaliningrad may still officially be part of Russia, but Russia is no longer part of Kaliningrad. And once that separation exists, even silently, even if it's just in people's minds, hopes and dreams, it's only a matter of time before silence becomes direction. Direction then becomes action, and action becomes history. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work, the absolutely best way to do it is becoming by Patreon member. The link is down below, and there is an additional chapter waiting for you at the end of this episode. Thanks much for watching. See you on Tuesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell, their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they